March 1992, United Nations Human Rights Commission, Geneva. The elderly Korean woman shifted uncomfortably on the wooden chair, wincing as she adjusted her position before the assembled diplomats. Her physical discomfort, visible in the tightening around her eyes, the subtle flinch as she lowered herself to sit, betrayed deeper wounds than time alone could explain. Hak-sun, 68, had carried this pain for half a century, her body bearing witness to history long denied. "It still hurts when I sit for too long," she testified, her voice steady despite the physical discomfort. "This pain is my daily reminder of what they did to us." The diplomats leaned forward, confronted with living evidence of what Imperial Japan had labelled comfort facilities, a euphemism that masked systematic sexual slavery across its wartime empire. Kim's testimony would shatter decades of silence, but the system that broke her body had been meticulously constructed years before her capture in 1941, August 1932, Shanghai, China. Japanese Lieutenant General Yasuji Okamura reviewed reports from military medical officers describing alarming rates of venereal disease among Imperial troops. According to military medical records later captured by Allied forces, 1,162 cases had been documented in a single division during the previous 3 months. Okamura's solution, recorded in internal memoranda, established the first official comfort station, a military-controlled brothel staffed with women who would be subjected to regular examinations to prevent disease transmission to Japanese soldiers. This prototype in Shanghai marked the beginning of systematic sexual enslavement that would expand across Asia. Military documents recovered after the war revealed the bureaucratic precision with which the system was implemented. Regulations dictated prices, 1 to 5 yen for enlisted men, 5 to 10 yen for officers. Duration, 30 minutes for enlisted men, 1 hour for officers, and hygiene protocols. Women were classified as military supplies in transportation manifests, categorized alongside ammunition and food rations. By 1938, as Japan's territorial ambitions expanded across Asia, the system grew exponentially. Imperial Army correspondence captured by American intelligence officers in 1945 documented the establishment of comfort stations in China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Korea. The recruitment methods, initially contracting existing prostitutes, evolved into widespread deception and outright abduction. Young women and girls, predominantly between 14 and 20 years old, were promised factory jobs, nursing positions, or domestic work, only to find themselves imprisoned in military brothels. Japanese historian Yoshimi Yoshiaki, examining recovered military archives in the 1990s, documented 160 separate comfort stations operating by 1942. Based on average staffing numbers of 25 to 30 women per station and factoring in women who died or were replaced, researchers estimated between 50,000 and 200,000 women were enslaved throughout the war. The majority came from Korea, approximately 51%, followed by China, 36%, with the remainder from other occupied territories and a small number of Japanese women. Kim Hak-sun had been among 922 Korean girls transported to China in November 1941, according to shipping records discovered in 1993. Her testimony decades later described being forced to serve between 10 to 15 soldiers daily, a figure consistent with military regulation documents prescribing comfort women quotas. These administrative records, with their clinical efficiency, contrasted brutally with survivors' accounts of physical trauma, pregnancies, forced abortions, and beatings. The systematic nature of these operations was confirmed through multiple documentation sources: military correspondence, transportation records, medical examination logs, and payment vouchers. Japanese War Ministry records from 1942, recovered by Allied forces during occupation, included budget allocations for comfort station construction in newly conquered territories. Health regulations documented weekly medical examinations focused exclusively on protecting soldiers from disease, with no consideration for the women's well-being. As Allied forces advanced across the Pacific, Japanese military units frequently murdered these women to eliminate witnesses, as documented in Australian war crimes investigation files from 1946. Others were abandoned without resources in foreign territories. Those who survived and returned home encountered societies where their experiences were met with shame rather than support. The victorious Allied powers, despite documenting these atrocities in occupation records, prioritized rebuilding Japan as a Cold War ally over pursuing justice for these specific victims. This institutional silence would envelop survivors for nearly 5 decades. Women like Kim lived with chronic physical pain, gynecological complications, and psychological trauma, while their experiences were erased from official histories. Japanese school textbooks made no mention of comfort women. International war crimes tribunals addressed other atrocities, while this systematic sexual enslavement remained unacknowledged. The pain that made sitting difficult for Kim Hak-sun in 1992 represented both physical wounds and the burden of history denied. Her testimony before the UN Commission would trigger international recognition that had been withheld for half a century. As she shifted uncomfortably in her chair that March morning, she carried the weight of thousands who had died before finding justice, and foreshadowed the testimony of hundreds more survivors who would follow her lead across Asia. The system designed to silence these women through death or shame had not anticipated their determination to speak, despite the pain it caused. Pain that lingered decades after the empire that inflicted it had fallen. January 1942. Manila, Philippines. 15-year-old Maria Rosa Henson felt the splintered wooden floor against her knees as Japanese soldiers forced her into a 2-meter square room partitioned only by a hanging blanket. Military police had seized her while gathering firewood near Clark Air Base, 3 days after Japanese forces had secured the Philippines. Within hours, she became one of 17 local women confined to a converted elementary school, requisitioned under Imperial Army Document Order Doc 605, 1941, which designated the building as Special Comfort Facility No. 3. The daily routine, documented in military regulations recovered after the war, imposed mechanical precision on profound brutality. The women awakened at 00:0600 hours for mandatory disinfection, using a caustic solution of mercuric chloride that burned delicate tissues. Maria would later recall the chemical smell that permeated the building, describing it as industrial and medical, like a factory and hospital combined. Soldiers arrived by military truck at 0700 hours, forming lines outside each partition. Military pay receipts preserved in Japanese defense archives show standardized fees. 1 yen for enlisted men, approximately 1/5 of their monthly salary. 2 yen for non-commissioned officers, 3 yen for officers. The women received none of this money. Military medical records documented the physical consequences. Weekly examination logs from Comfort Station No. 5 in Guangdong, China, recorded instances of cervical tearing, vaginal hemorrhage, pelvic inflammatory condition, recorded dispassionately alongside notations about prophylactic treatments. The documentation focused exclusively on preventing disease transmission to soldiers. Examination logs from 26 facilities across occupied territories, recovered during Allied advances, show no medical treatment provided for the women's injuries beyond the minimum necessary to keep them functioning. Across the occupied territories, the facilities operated with standardized regulations but varying conditions. In Nanjing, China, comfort stations established after the infamous massacre housed women in abandoned homes with accommodations described in military correspondence as minimally adequate, containing only sleeping mats and washing buckets. In contrast, facilities in Singapore's established red light district repurposed existing brothels with tiled floors and electric lighting. A Japanese officer's diary, recovered near Rangoon, described Burmese comfort stations as primitive bamboo structures with tin roofs that became unbearably hot during midday shifts. The physical impact followed consistent patterns across all locations. Military medical records from 1943 documented an average of 15 to 25 men per woman daily. The Korean survivor's testimony decades later would reveal the physical consequences of this volume: chronic urinary tract infections, uterine prolapse, fistulas between the vaginal wall and bladder or rectum. These injuries, initially documented in clinical military reports, would manifest as the persistent sitting pain described in later testimonies. The damage to pelvic floor muscles and connective tissues, extensive scarring, and inadequately healed tears created permanent disabilities. Pregnancy emerged as a persistent administrative problem for facility operators. Quartermaster records from 1942-1943 documented regular shipments of abortifacient medications to comfort stations. A military nurse's diary recovered in the Philippines detailed performing 29 abortions in a 3-month period at a single facility, noting that women received no recovery time before resuming their assigned duties. Those who developed infections from these procedures received minimal treatment. Medical records classified these women with notation KS, Kyushutsu sum, to extract, indicating they were removed from the system, their fates unrecorded. The psychological control mechanisms operated with calculated efficiency. Survivors' testimonies described consistent patterns across different geographic locations. Women who resisted were publicly beaten. Korean survivor Lee Yong-soo, captured at age 14, testified in 1993 about a Filipino woman beaten to death for attempting escape, her body displayed for 3 days as warning. This account aligned with recovered military police records documenting disciplinary actions for flight attempts at multiple facilities. Japanese military regulations regarding comfort women, recovered from occupation headquarters in 1946, revealed the dehumanizing bureaucratic language. The women were classified as special procurement items, tokushu chotatsu hin, requisitioned through the same administrative channels as vehicle parts or construction materials. Transportation manifests listed them alongside ammunition and medical supplies. This commodification extended to their bodies. Military health regulations mandated their disposal in cases of death from disease, requiring burial in unmarked graves distinct from military cemeteries. The contrast between the clinical military documentation and survivor experiences emerged starkly in post-war interviews, where military records noted prophylactic stations providing hygiene services. Survivors described imprisonment and rape. Where medical reports documented examination compliance, women recounted being held down by military police during painful inspections. Where administrative records listed special comfort service, survivors named it sexual slavery. As Allied forces advanced across the Pacific, the fate of these women became increasingly precarious. Military communication records from 1944 to 45 revealed orders for special facility closure procedures in territories facing imminent capture. In the Philippines, advancing American units discovered mass graves containing women's bodies near abandoned comfort stations. Australian war crimes investigators documented survivors in Rabaul, who described 70 women shot and buried in trenches as Japanese forces retreated. Others were simply abandoned without documentation, identification, or resources in foreign territories as the imperial military withdrew. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, these women received no formal liberation. Many remained stranded in foreign countries without identification papers. Those who managed to return home encountered societies where their experiences were met with shame rather than recognition. The systematic sexual enslavement program that had damaged their bodies would remain largely unaddressed in the post-war trials, a silence that would persist for nearly 5 decades while their physical wounds turned into chronic pain. September 1945. Tokyo Bay. General Douglas MacArthur's occupation headquarters processed thousands of Japanese military documents. In a stack of papers marked Medical Administration, American intelligence officers discovered reports detailing the Comfort Women System. The documents, translated and catalogued as SCAP Record Group 331, contained transportation manifests, medical examination protocols, and facility regulations. These papers provided comprehensive evidence of systematic sexual enslavement across the Japanese Empire. Occupation authorities filed the records away, their focus directed toward rebuilding Japan as a bulwark against communism, rather than pursuing justice for these specific victims. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East, convened in May 1946, addressed numerous Japanese war crimes. The proceedings, lasting 2.5 years, generated 49,158 pages of testimony. Despite evidence in occupation files, the systematic sexual enslavement of women appeared only peripherally, mentioned in testimony regarding the rape of Nanking, but not prosecuted as a distinct war crime. No comfort women testified. Dutch women from internment camps in Indonesia provided the only direct testimony about sexual violence, their experiences acknowledged because they were Western colonial citizens rather than Asian comfort women. This judicial silence established a pattern that would persist for decades. The San Francisco Peace Treaty of 1951, comprising 408 words on 27 pages, made no mention of comfort women or sexual slavery. The document, ratified by 49 nations, established Japan's post-war relationship with the international community without addressing these specific crimes. Bilateral agreements between Japan and former occupied countries similarly omitted references to this system. The 1965 Treaty on Basic Relations between Japan and South Korea, accompanied by $800 million in economic aid, included language stating all war claims had been completely and finally settled. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, survivors lived with physical and psychological trauma while their experiences remained unacknowledged. Many women, like former comfort woman Yoon Do-ri, described in a 1996 interview how she retreated to remote mountain areas of Korea, unable to marry or return to normal society due to physical injuries and social stigma. Medical records from this period documented women seeking treatment for chronic pelvic pain, urinary incontinence, and reproductive system damage without disclosing its origins. Hospital records from Seoul National University Hospital showed 11% of unmarried women over 40 seeking gynecological care between 1950 and 1970 had similar injury patterns, though the connection to wartime sexual slavery remained unrecognized. The silence began cracking in the 1970s through scholarly research. Japanese historian Senda Kako published Military Comfort Women in 1973, selling 8,000 copies in its first printing. The book, based on interviews with former Japanese soldiers, provided the first published account of the comfort system, but framed it primarily as military prostitution rather than forced sexual slavery. Korean researchers, including Professor Yoon Chong-ok of Eoha Women's University, began documenting survivors' experiences in 1980. Her initial research identified 17 survivors living in rural South Korea. Their medical records showed consistent patterns: reproductive system damage, chronic infections, and mobility limitations affecting their ability to sit or stand for extended periods. The women's movement provided crucial momentum. The Asian Women's Association, established in 1977 with 220 initial members, created networks that would later support comfort women's testimony. The Korean Church Women United, founded in 1967, began investigating war crimes against women in 1981. These organizations operated with limited resources. The Korean Church Women's initial research budget totaled just $2,300, but created documentation that would prove essential for later advocacy. By the late 1980s, surviving comfort women had reached advanced age. A Korean government survey in 1990 identified 234 living survivors, their average age 69.8 years. These women had lived with physical pain and psychological trauma for over 4 decades without acknowledgement or compensation. Many survived on minimal incomes. 67% reported monthly earnings below 50,000 won, approximately $62 in 1990 currency, according to the Korean Council for Women drafted for military sexual slavery by Japan. Their economic difficulties directly resulted from physical limitations and lack of family support, consequences of their wartime experiences. The turning point came unexpectedly. Hak-sun, then 67 years old, watched television coverage about Korean men seeking compensation for forced labor under Japanese occupation. In August 1991, she contacted the Korean Council, stating simply, "I was a comfort woman too. Why is no one talking about us?" On August 14, 1991, Kim became the first survivor to publicly identify herself, holding a press conference attended by 11 journalists. Only 3 newspapers initially reported her testimony. The Japanese government issued no official response to her disclosure. Kim's testimony broke a silence spanning 46 years. Her public statement, running 1,218 words in its official transcript, detailed her capture at age 17 and subsequent imprisonment in a comfort station in China. 3 additional survivors came forward within 2 months, each describing similar experiences across different territories. Their testimonies revealed consistent patterns of abduction, confinement, and physical abuse. More significantly, they described identical long-term physical consequences: chronic pain when sitting, urinary incontinence, and reproductive system damage. These initial testimonies created a foundation for broader recognition. Professor Yun Chong-ok presented documentary evidence at the 1992 Asian Solidarity Conference on Japanese war crimes. Her presentation included military documents, medical records, and survivor testimony establishing the systematic nature of these crimes. The conference, attended by representatives from 8 Asian nations, issued a joint statement calling for Japanese government acknowledgement and apology. After decades of institutional silence, survivors' voices finally reached an international audience. Their physical pain, persistent, documented, undeniable, would become the foundation for demanding recognition that had been withheld for nearly half a century. February 1993, Seoul National University Hospital. Dr. Pai Kim Hee-jin carefully documented the medical examination findings of 7 former comfort women, now elderly patients averaging 71.3 years of age. Their bodies bore witness in ways documents alone could not. X-rays revealed pelvic fractures improperly healed after 5 decades. Ultrasound imaging showed extensive scarring throughout reproductive tissues. Physical examinations documented chronic inflammation, fistulas, and structural damage consistent with repetitive trauma. "It hurts when we sit," each woman reported independently, describing nearly identical sensations of burning pain radiating from pelvic floor muscles damaged beyond repair. The medical evidence provided irrefutable confirmation of testimony first delivered by Kim Hak-sun 17 months earlier. Her August 1991 press conference, initially covered by only 3 newspapers, had ignited awareness that spread across Asia. Within 100 days of her testimony, 7 additional Korean survivors had come forward publicly. By February 1993, similar testimonies emerged from China, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Taiwan. Each woman described experiences separated by thousands of kilometers, yet connected by identical patterns of abduction, confinement, and systematic abuse. Filipino survivor Maria Rosa Henson, held at a comfort station near Clark Air Base from 1942-1945, became the first from her country to speak publicly in September 1992. Her testimony before the Philippine Senate lasted 4 hours and 16 minutes, detailing daily abuses by Japanese soldiers. Medical examinations conducted at Philippine General Hospital documented injuries matching those found in Korean survivors: pelvic floor muscle damage, urethral scarring, and reproductive system injuries causing lifetime disability. These physical findings, consistent across women from different countries with no prior contact, provided powerful corroboration. Physical evidence accumulated beyond survivor examinations. Researchers located 5 former comfort stations still standing: 2 in China, 1 in Indonesia, 1 in Taiwan, and 1 in the Philippines. Architectural analysis of the Bahay Napula, Red House, comfort station in the Philippines revealed modifications consistent with survivor descriptions. Divided rooms measuring 2.2 meters. barred windows installed after the building's original construction, and structural reinforcement of bathroom plumbing consistent with descriptions of forced disinfection procedures. Archaeological excavations at the former Shangri-La Comfort Station site in Lintong, China, uncovered medical waste, including 47 ampules matching Japanese military prophylactic medications and 137 condom fragments manufactured by Okamoto Rubber Company, a military supplier. Carbon dating confirmed the 1943-1945 provenance of these materials. The physical evidence, tangible and measurable, reinforced survivor testimony in ways impossible to dismiss. As women came forward across Asia, the pattern of physical ailments showed remarkable consistency. Medical documentation from examination programs in South Korea, the Philippines, and Taiwan recorded the same cluster of long-term health consequences. 78% reported chronic pelvic pain, 64% experienced recurring urinary tract infections, 53% suffered from incontinence, and 87% described pain during extended sitting. Dr. Park Myung-hee, examining 19 Korean survivors in 1993, noted that 16 exhibited symptoms of osteoarthritis in the hips and pelvic joints, occurring at rates 3 times higher than control groups of similar age. The Japanese government response evolved as evidence mounted. In January 1992, historian Yoshimi Yoshiaki discovered decisive documents in Japan's National Defense Agency archives. Written orders from the Japanese military explicitly directing the establishment of comfort facilities. Prime Minister Miyazawa Kichi, confronted with this evidence during a diplomatic visit to South Korea days later, offered the first official acknowledgement. We cannot deny the government's involvement. This limited recognition, comprising just 7 words, marked the first crack in 50 years of official denial. International recognition accelerated through 1992 and 1993. The United Nations Commission on Human Rights, during its 48th session, received testimony from 8 former comfort women representing 4 countries. Special Rapporteur Radhika Kumaraswamy conducted a 9-month investigation, interviewing 16 survivors and reviewing thousands of documents. Her February 1994 report, spanning 38 pages, concluded definitively that the comfort system constituted sexual slavery in accordance with international law. The physical evidence of survivors' ongoing medical conditions formed a central component of her conclusions. Japanese government investigation culminated in the Kono Statement of August 4, 1993. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono acknowledged that the then Japanese military was, directly or indirectly, involved in the establishment and management of the comfort stations and the transfer of comfort women, and that in many cases they were recruited against their own will. This statement, 685 words in its English translation, represented the most comprehensive official acknowledgement to date. Yet for survivors, physical pain continued regardless of political statements. During testimony before the U.S. House of Representatives in February 1996, Korean survivor Kim Sun-deok described how she still required a special cushion to sit for more than 15 minutes due to pelvic injuries. Philippine survivor Remedios Felias testified that she underwent 11 surgeries between 1952 and 1987, attempting to repair damage from her time in a comfort station. Indonesian survivor Mardiam described chronic infections that persisted despite dozens of medical treatments spanning 5 decades. The breaking of silence transformed many survivors. Kim Hak-sun, initially hesitant to speak publicly, provided testimony 37 times between 1991 and her death in 1997. At each appearance, attendees noted how she shifted constantly in her seat, physical discomfort visible in her movements. Yet she persisted. During her final public testimony at Tokyo District Court in March 1996, she stated, "This pain reminds me daily what happened. I speak because of this pain, not despite it." As international awareness grew, women who had hidden their experiences for decades found validation through shared testimony. Survivors from different countries met for the first time at the Asian Women's Solidarity Conference in Tokyo, August 1992. Filipino survivor Maria Rosa Henson later wrote, "When I heard the Korean women describe exactly the same pain I feel when sitting too long, I wept. For the first time, I understood I was not alone in my suffering." These connections, forged through recognition of identical physical traumas, created networks of support that would propel the movement for justice forward through the coming decades. December 1994. Tokyo District Court. Kim Hak-sun shifted uncomfortably on the wooden bench as she became the first former comfort woman to pursue legal action in Japan's judicial system. Her lawsuit, filed alongside 9 other Korean survivors, demanded $20 million, approximately $200,000, per plaintiff and an official government apology. The courtroom's hard seating proved especially difficult for the plaintiffs, several of whom required special cushions to sit through the proceedings. Their physical discomfort during the 6-hour session provided visible evidence of injuries sustained half a century earlier. Legal battles multiplied across Japanese courts between 1994 and 2000. Survivors filed 10 separate lawsuits involving 58 plaintiffs from Korea, China, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Each case faced identical procedural obstacles. Japanese government attorneys cited the 1965 treaty with South Korea, arguing all potential claims had been settled through that agreement's $800 million economic cooperation package. They invoked the statute of limitations, contending the standard 20-year limit for civil claims had expired decades earlier. Most fundamentally, they argued that international law during the 1940s did not prohibit military sexual slavery, rendering current legal standards inapplicable. The December 2000 Women's International War Crimes Tribunal on Japan's military sexual slavery, though lacking formal legal authority, provided judicial recognition through alternative means. This People's Tribunal, convened in Tokyo over 5 days, heard testimony from 75 survivors and experts. Its 200-page judgment, issued by former international judges from the United States, Argentina, the United Kingdom, and Kenya, declared Emperor Hirohito and 9 other Japanese officials guilty of crimes against humanity. For survivors, many now in their 70s, this symbolic justice offered validation their bodies had been denied for 5 decades. Japanese government responses evolved through a series of partial measures. In July 1995, Prime Minister Tomichi Murayama announced the establishment of the Asian Women's Fund, a quasi-governmental organization created to distribute atonement money to former comfort women. The fund combined private donations with government contributions for medical welfare support. Each recipient would receive approximately $2 million, about $20,000, along with a letter of apology signed by the Prime Minister. The fund's structure revealed fundamental tensions. While government money financed administrative costs and welfare benefits, the atonement payments came solely from private donations, allowing Japan to avoid direct compensation that might constitute legal admission of state responsibility. Survivor responses to the Asian Women's Fund reflected divided perspectives. By its conclusion in 2007, the fund had distributed payments to 285 former comfort women, 201 in the Philippines, 61 in South Korea, and 13 in Taiwan. Yet many survivors rejected the payments, demanding direct government compensation instead. The Korean Council for Justice and Remembrance, representing survivors in South Korea, documented that only 7 of the 207 known Korean survivors accepted payments. Those who accepted faced ostracism from advocacy groups and other survivors, intensifying divisions within an already traumatized community. International pressure mounted through United Nations mechanisms. In February 1996, Special Rapporteur Radhika Kumaraswamy submitted a comprehensive report to the UN Commission on Human Rights, explicitly categorizing the comfort system as sexual slavery under international law. The report, drawing on testimony from 16 survivors, recommended specific actions: acknowledgement of legal responsibility, formal apology, compensation directly from government funds, and inclusion of these events in educational curricula. 6 subsequent UN reports between 1996 and 2010 reaffirmed these recommendations, creating sustained diplomatic pressure. The United States Congress entered the debate on July 30, 2007, passing House Resolution 121 by unanimous consent. The resolution, comprising 908 words, called on Japan to formally acknowledge, apologize, and accept historical responsibility for the comfort women system. 3 former comfort women testified before Congress during deliberations, their physical disabilities evident as they required assistance to sit and stand during proceedings. Japanese diplomatic response came swiftly. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expressed apologies for the situation the women found themselves in, while maintaining that there was no evidence of coercion in a narrow sense, a qualification that survivors found deeply inadequate. National legislative bodies across Asia passed similar resolutions. The South Korean National Assembly in October 2008, the Taiwan Legislative Yuan in November 2008, and the Philippines House of Representatives in March 2009. These political statements, while lacking enforcement mechanisms, created cumulative pressure on Japan to address historical responsibility more comprehensively. By 2010, 12 municipal councils in Japan had passed resolutions urging their national government to offer a clearer apology and compensation. Throughout these political and legal developments, the survivors' health continued deteriorating. Medical records from the Korean House of Sharing, a residential facility established for former comfort women in 1992, documented the progressive nature of their injuries. Residents required increasing pain management for chronic conditions directly linked to their wartime experiences. The facility's medical ward, initially staffed by 1 part-time nurse, expanded to include 3 full-time nurses and a visiting physician by 2005, reflecting the intensifying care needs of aging survivors. The 2011 Constitutional Court of Korea ruling marked a pivotal development for survivors. The court determined that the Korean government's failure to pursue comfort women claims against Japan constituted a violation of the former comfort women's constitutional rights. This judgment, spanning 59 pages, compelled the Korean government to pursue the matter through diplomatic channels, transforming what had been primarily activist-driven advocacy into official state policy. For survivors, many now in their 80s and experiencing increasing physical difficulties, the ruling provided institutional validation of their decades-long struggle. By 2012, diplomatic tensions increased as comfort women became a central issue in Japan-Korea relations. Wednesday demonstrations outside the Japanese embassy in Seoul, begun in January 1992, passed their 1,000th consecutive weekly protest in December 2011. The protests, initially attended by dozens, now regularly drew hundreds of participants. Despite declining health, surviving comfort women maintained their presence at these demonstrations. Many arrived in wheelchairs, their physical limitations visible evidence of both aging and unresolved injuries. Their persistent presence, despite increasing physical pain, communicated determination more powerful than any political statement. As one survivor told reporters during the 1,000th demonstration, "It hurts to sit here week after week, but I will continue until I can no longer move at all. This pain reminds me why justice matters." November 2023. House of Sharing, Gwangju, South Korea. Lee Yong-soo, 94, adjusted her position in the wheelchair as the Japanese delegation entered the memorial room. The special cushion beneath her provided minimal relief from the familiar burning pain that had been her constant companion for 8 decades. 12 Japanese university students stood silently before her, their eyes moving between the elderly woman and the wall of photographs displaying faces of comfort, women who had died without receiving the justice they sought. Only 11 South Korean survivors remained alive from the 239 who had registered with the government since 1992. Their dwindling numbers, 16 survivors in 2020, 14 in 2021, 11 in 2022, 11 in 2023, marked time's unforgiving progression more precisely than any calendar. The physical manifestation of trauma shaped these final survivors' daily existence. Medical records from the House of Sharing documented the progression of their injuries: increasing pelvic floor dysfunction, chronic inflammation, skeletal deterioration, where fractures had healed improperly decades earlier. Their medical care required specialized protocols developed specifically for their unique conditions. Standard geriatric care proved insufficient for women whose bodies bore the compounded impact of wartime sexual violence and subsequent decades without appropriate treatment. The facility's medical director noted that all residents exhibited sitting discomfort that intensified with age, rather than diminishing, contradicting typical pain patterns in elderly patients. Memorial efforts transformed the physical landscape across Asia and beyond. The first Comfort Women statue, erected outside the Japanese embassy in Seoul in December 2011, depicted a seated girl with empty space beside her for visitors to sit in solidarity. Similar memorials appeared in Busan, South Korea, Manila, Philippines, San Francisco, California, Berlin, Germany, and 7 other locations globally. These bronze figures, always portrayed in seated positions, silently referenced the physical suffering that united survivors across national boundaries. Their placement in public spaces ensured that even as survivors' voices diminished, their testimony remained physically present in civic discourse. Educational approaches varied dramatically between countries. South Korean textbooks devoted an average of 1.2 pages to the Comfort Women system across major publishers. Japanese textbooks mentioned the topic in just 19 of 50 approved secondary school texts, with references averaging 26 words. In the Philippines, the topic appeared primarily in university curricula, rather than secondary education. Taiwan mandated inclusion in its national curriculum beginning in 2018, allotting specific instructional hours to the subject. This educational patchwork ensured uneven understanding across generations, with young people in different countries encountering radically different historical narratives about the same events. Diplomatic tensions culminated in the December 28, 2015 agreement between Japan and South Korea. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expressed his most sincere apologies and remorse to the women who experienced immeasurable pain and incurable physical and psychological wounds. The agreement established a Y-1 billion, approximately 8.3 million foundation to provide support for survivors. The Korean government agreed to consider the issue finally and irreversibly resolved, and to discuss removing the Comfort Woman statue from outside the Japanese embassy. This resolution, negotiated without survivor participation, sparked immediate backlash. Polling showed 75.9% of South Koreans opposed the agreement. 67% believed Japan's apology remained insufficient. The physical suffering that began in comfort stations continued manifesting in surprising ways. Medical researchers documented how trauma altered the survivors' aging process. A 2017 study of 7 former comfort women at Seoul National University Hospital revealed telomere shortening consistent with accelerated cellular aging compared to control groups. Their bodies exhibited inflammatory markers at levels typically found in individuals 8 to 10 years older. The research provided biological evidence for what survivors had insisted for decades. That trauma remained physically present in their bodies long after the historical events ended. Their persistent sitting pain represented just one visible manifestation of deeper physiological alterations. Individual stories increasingly focused on reconciliation rather than compensation as survivors reached advanced age. Lee Yong-soo, once among the most outspoken advocates for Japanese government accountability, shifted her emphasis to educational initiatives in her final years. During a 2019 press conference, seated on her special cushion, she stated, "Before I die, I want to teach young people this history. Not for revenge, but so they understand how precious peace truly is." Her physical discomfort remained visible during these appearances. Assistants regularly helped adjust her position when sitting pain became too intense. This physical vulnerability, displayed alongside moral strength, created powerful imagery that transcended political arguments. Memorial projects increasingly focused on preserving survivors' medical histories alongside their testimonies. The Korean Council for Justice and Remembrance launched the Medical History Documentation Project in 2020, creating comprehensive records of 16 survivors' health trajectories from military sexual slavery through their final years. These records, combining contemporary medical data with historical documentation, established irrefutable evidence of how trauma physically persisted across decades. The project director explained, "When future generations question what happened, these medical records will provide answers no political statement could refute." The Comfort Women's physical suffering created unexpected moments of human connection across political divides. During the 1,500th consecutive Wednesday demonstration outside the Japanese embassy in January 2021, a group of Japanese medical students presented research on the specific physiological mechanisms behind the survivors' sitting pain. Their presentation, delivered in Korean, detailed how trauma to pelvic floor muscles and connective tissues created pain patterns that intensified rather than diminished with age. This medical validation from Japanese researchers brought many survivors to tears. One commented afterward, "For decades, I wondered if anyone truly believed our pain was real. Today, I feel that someone not only believes, but understands." As the remaining survivors approached life's end, they transformed their physical suffering into tools for connection rather than division. The final Korean survivor, during a 2023 interview, demonstrated this evolution. "The pain when I sit reminds me daily of what humans can do to one another. But it also reminds me that I survived. My body carries this history so younger generations don't need to experience it themselves." Her statement revealed how physical suffering, once a source of shame and isolation, had become a vehicle for testimony more powerful than words alone could convey. The legacy of the Comfort Women lives now in bronze memorials where visitors sit alongside silent statues, in medical textbooks documenting unique trauma patterns, in educational programs teaching history through survivors' embodied experiences, in diplomatic tensions between nations, and in reconciliation efforts across generations. Their physical suffering, the pain that made sitting difficult across 8 decades, became the foundation for memory that outlives individual survivors. What began as a weapon of war, the systematic breaking of women's bodies, transformed into powerful testimony that no political revision can erase. The hurt that made sitting painful became the truth that ensures history remains present, embodied, and undeniable.